years ago. Padder will then say a few words, and to kick it off, I'm going to play Misha Era on the fiddle. So
yeah.
Here goes.
I love this piece of music, I love.
Misha Era, Mór Maglór, mé de Rockú Colin Croga, Shidamain on Hailach Bera, Mór Manara, Mawani and Doila Mahar, Huigni May, non Hailach Bera.
Good man, Charlie.
I'd just like to read the witness statement from Seamus Finn, Ackboy, the adjutant of the Meath Brigade of the IRA. Capture of Trim Barracks, County Meath, 30th of September 1920. In 1920, the Trim area had a strong volunteer battalion, an IRA unit which had already proven its worth in the fight for Barracks when its members had shown that they possessed both determination and daring. Since then, they had been given a special course of training, so that now they were efficient as well as determined and daring fighters. A series of police swoops during the preceding months had deprived the brigade of some of its best officers, but others had been trained to fill the vacancies, and by the summer of 1920, the area was in a solid position. Towards the end of 1919 and in the early months of 1920, attacks on several barracks had been planned, but each time there had to be last-minute changes of plan, resulting in repeated disappointments, except of course at Ballivor, where one policeman was shot and others and our men seized arms and ammunition kept in the barracks. A boast by one of the Trim police regarding the impregnability of the barracks caused us to consider the possibility of attacking the Trim stronghold. The suggestion was discussed with the men of the Trim battalion, and they unhesitantly agreed that the attack should be carried out. So our decision was made, and our next step was to devise ways and means to lay efficient plans of attack. In this respect, we were afforded very fortunate assistance by an ex-RIC sergeant named T.J. McGilligan, who had earlier resigned from the police force as a protest against Britain's conscription plans during World War I. This man gave us names of constables who were reliable from our point of view, and one of these in turn gave valuable information regarding the layout of the barracks itself and regarding the movements of its garrison. He told us, for one thing, that the district inspector was to be absent during a certain weekend, and this item of information decided us upon our date for the contemplated attack, Sunday the 30th of September 1920. The undertaking was a big one, requiring careful planning and perfect timing on the part of the brigade staff, whose task was to plan the attack. And we needed superb fighting ability on the part of the men who were to carry it out. The Meath Brigade area at that time took in the entire county and the Delvin district of County Westmeath as well. Its officers were Sean Boylan, Dunboyne Brigade, Commanding Officer, Sean Hayes, Drumbarra Brigade, Vice Commanding Officer, Seamus Finn, Ackboy, Adjutant, and Seamus Higgins, Trim Brigade Quartermaster. With the information which had been given to us by the constable to guide us, we had sent out scouts to note carefully the movements of the police on each successive Sunday prior to the date fixed for the attack. Their report was detailed and comprehensive, which gave us exact information on the activities of the police garrison at the particular time which interested us. The report said that the bigger portion of the garrison left the barracks at 7:55 each Sunday morning for 8 o'clock Mass, leaving therefore less than half their force behind on barrack duty. The sergeant and occasionally the head constable would remain in the barracks, and in all we estimated that the manpower of the garrison at the time each Sunday morning would be about 8 men. On Sunday morning the 30th of September, we knew the district inspector would be absent and his quarters vacant. With these details at our disposal, we arranged a meeting with the officers of the Trim Battalion, with whom we went over carefully all phases of our plans. For it was upon these officers and their men that the brunt of the fighting was to fall. When we were satisfied that these men knew all that was expected of them, our next task was to organise possible protection for them during the fight in the event of police reinforcements attempted to break through to the rescue of the Trim garrison. With this in view, we held a conference with the battalion officers of the other areas of the county and issued orders that all roads leading to Trim should be systematically blocked. This matter being arranged to our satisfaction, we made elaborate arrangements for the dumping of arms that we hoped to capture and also for the provision of transport. The business of procuring oil and other flammable substances to be used against the barracks was delegated to the brigade adjutant. The vital job of capturing the police who had gone to Mass as they emerged from the church was entrusted to the men of the 1st Battalion under the brigade commanding officer Boylan and commandants Lynham and Dunn. The final joint meeting of the brigade council and the officers of the Trim Battalion was held on Tuesday night, the 25th of September at Trim. All details of the attack were gone over, and when each man felt perfectly satisfied that he knew minutely every action that was to take place, a further serious consideration was then discussed, that of affording protection and to our well-wishers and friends of Trim against possible reprisals on the part of the enemy following the attack. A certain point on the wall surrounding the barracks was selected as the point over which the attackers were to climb. This was the point directly opposite the district inspector's quarters, where we felt the initial moves of our men were most likely to escape detection from the occupants of the barracks. This point was at the side gate leading onto the fair green. Our plans worked like magic. The men of the number 1 section were over the back wall and through the door before the police knew anything of what was afoot. Taken so completely by surprise, they were overcome almost immediately. All that is, except Head Constable White, who rushed towards a box of grenades, but was shot through the lung before he could do any harm to our men. He alone showed any heart for the struggle, and so the reputedly impregnable Trim RIC barracks fell into our hands without even a semblance of resistance. Thanks entirely to the elaborate planning of the brigade and local officers, in conjunction with the information given by our contacts among the RIC, to the perfect timing which the operation was carried out, and the cool and effective and efficient way in which our men had set about their work, and the excellence of our intelligence men. Gathering all the arms and other materials we could find, and having helped the captured police to remove their personal belongings and those of their friends at Mass, we set fire to the barracks, which was soon a blazing holocaust, and before noon was no more than a smouldering ruin. Head Constable White had been shot through the lung and badly wounded. We got him attended to by Dr. T.J. Lynch, who removed him to the hospital section of the local workhouse, where, incidentally, we had made arrangements for the treatment of any of our own men who might happen to be wounded in the attack. Fortunately, however, we did not require attention for our men, who had carried out their morning's work, suffering no more than a scratch. Meanwhile, at the church, our friends had been equally successful. Under the leadership of Brigade Officer Commanding Boylan, Battalion Commandant Lynham, and Vice Commandant Frank Carolan, those men mainly drawn from the 1st Battalion, captured the police as they left the church. One policeman, hearing the confusion outside, hid in a confessional, but he too was taken when the numbers had been checked and he was missed from the company. In this part of the action, together with the 3 officers, were Barney Dunn, James Maguire and M. Phoenix from the Dunboyne area. With the barracks well aflame, we checked our capture of arms and ammunition. 20 rifles and carbines, 20 shotguns, some of which were no longer serviceable, and 6 revolvers was our capture of arms. Ammunition for all arms, a box of grenades and some bayonets constituted the remainder of our capture, along with altogether a very satisfactory morning's work. At a hastily summoned conference, we decided that the men should get out of town as quickly as possible, rest during the remainder of the day, then reassemble at O'Hagan's at 9 o'clock that evening to await possible enemy activities. The brigade adjutant, with volunteers Sherry and Lawler of Trim and volunteer Gaynor to drive, securely dumped the capture of arms, then set off to Atboy to meet the company officers there, and having arranged the return journey to Trim that night, settled down to a well-deserved sleep. The events did not work out so happily for Trim. A convoy of enemy arrived there in the afternoon, and in a spirit of reprisal, they fired indiscriminately through the town, wounding some youths who were playing hurling. In alarm, some of the more prominent men of the town approached the officers in charge of the British forces, and were assured that no further reprisals would be taken for the destruction of the barracks. These townsmen met our officers and men when they arrived to take up positions from which they could prevent reprisals, and told them that such precautions were no longer necessary. As a result, a certain slackness set in among our men, and they seemed to consider that pre-arranged plans for guarding our friends' houses need now not be carried out. So our men withdrew in good faith. But the following morning brought a shock when we learned that the Tans broke loose during the night and burned the houses in the town contrary to the assurances of their officers. At a subsequent inquiry held in the General HQ in Dublin, the officers constituting the court declared that in view of the interference of the townspeople, little or no responsibility rested with our men for the failure to guard against the possibility of British reprisal in Trim. It was some time subsequently before we were able to remove the captured arms and ammunition from the dump where we had placed them, for our movements were hampered by a particularly active company of auxiliaries that had been drafted into Trim immediately following the fall of the RIC barracks. Eventually the loot was distributed safely over various areas of the brigade, with the exception of the box of grenades, which was recaptured by the enemy. This was seized by a hold-up patrol between Trim and Ballivor, when it was being convoyed to Ballivor by Tom Byrne of Raharney Company. Byrne was badly beaten up by the Black and Tans, and was later sentenced to 10 years penal servitude, which he was serving in an English jail until released under the terms of the truce. The worst of the British official reprisals for the destruction of the Trim RIC barracks were not launched until approximately 4 o'clock on Monday morning, when about 200 auxiliaries and Black and Tans from Gormanstown descended upon the town and began an orgy of terror and destruction. The O'Higgins home was their first objective. They smashed their way into it to find only Mrs. O'Higgins and her daughter were inside. Brigade Quartermaster Seamus O'Higgins and his brother Sean were still with the active service unit. The two ladies were given but a few minutes to get out of the house, which was then set up in flames. It was the first of many fires during a night that will never be forgotten by those who witnessed the scenes of plunder and brutality that followed. Fully a quarter of the town was completely gutted. Amongst the places burned by the British, in addition to the O'Higgins house, was the drapery shop and residence of Harry and Bob Allen of High Street. Bob Allen was the chairman of the Sinn Féin Corley Cantor, but Harry took no part in politics. The bakery and mineral water works of E. and J. Smith and Co. of Market Street also went up in flames, together with a residence attached. The Smiths employed about 100 persons, and the object of the burning was to create unemployment. The home of Commandant Mooney's parents was also wrecked, and both of them brutally ill-treated. The parents and sister of volunteer P. O'Hagan and Harry O'Hagan were similarly abused in their homes, and their homes smashed up and their furniture and effects also smashed. Lawler's house in Castle Street came in for like treatment, and the parents of Paddy and Joe Lawler were beaten up. Many other houses were broken into and looted. The town hall was burnt down. Few public houses escaped. On the same morning of the RIC, some of the RIC who had garrisoned the barracks raided the house of our contact, resigned a few days previously. He had been in contact with us since the resignation of Sergeant McGilligan and kept us well informed of enemy activities. Fortunately, he was not home at the time of the police raid and consequently escaped certain death and mutilation. Following the raid, he contacted some of our men and a car was commandeered to drive him to safety. The car was driven by Dennis Maher, now Reverend Father Dennis Maher of the Welsh Mission. Meath was sought after by the Bhutans and British agents, but was successful in evading their attention. He subsequently joined the Garda Síochána and was promoted to the rank of superintendent. He was stationed in County Longford. Now I'd just like to read out the names of those who took part in burning of the Twin Barracks. Sean Boylan, Seamus Finn, Con Caffrey, James Connell, Joe Lawler, Phil Doggett, Joe Andrews, Pat Dignan, Paddy Andrews, Barney Dunn, Christopher Ennis, Frank Carlin, Pat Fay, Mick Giles, Larry Giles, Pat Giles, Pat Hines, Dick Harmon, Joe Healy, Joe Kelly, Paddy Kenny, Kit Lynham, Paddy Lawler, Tom Wallace, Luke Sherry, Matt Wallace, Stephen Sherry, Con Reed, Pat Quinn, Michael Plunkett, Martin Phoenix, James McGuire, Matt Matthews, Paddy Mooney, Mick Miles, Joe Nolan, Sean O'Higgins, Joe O'Brien, Pat O'Hagan, Pat O'Hara, Harry O'Hagan, and Pat Proctor.
Hello there, Dave. Golair agus mila buchas as chatún seo an lá starúil seo I baile á trim. Tá mé anna buach go tháinig sibh inniu chuig an comóra 100 bliain ansaí an Barrack RIC a tharla fadó. Agus bhil an buchas ará dús de cuman Aontú baile á trim as an ócáid seo a agrú. I'd like to thank you all very much for coming here today. I really appreciate it. I want to thank first and foremost, Councillor Emer Tobin and Councillor Noel French for coming along today. We greatly appreciate it. And I want to thank the Trim coming, Aontú coming for organising this as well. And I'd like to thank our impromptu colour party that jumped up into responsibility today as well. I'm glad to see there's only one gun here today, and that's a plastic gun on the ground. So fair play. It's a real honour for me to be able to speak today at the walls, the existing walls that existed 100 years ago and that defended an RIC station here in the town of Trim. And we have to ask ourselves, why do we commemorate these types of events? And for me it's very clear, there are two major important reasons to commemorate these events. The first is to show respect for the men and women who gave so much of themselves with regards to trying to achieve our freedom. Now these are men and women who could have said, no, I'm too busy. No, I've got stuff on at the moment. No, I have to protect myself and our family. But they didn't. They went beyond the call of duty with regards to risking their own lives and the lives of their families. And it's an incredible thing because this was one of the weakest generations that Ireland had ever seen. It was only about 2 generations after the famine, and the famine had floored this country. This country was on its knees back in 1918, 1919, 1920. At least half the population had died or had emigrated at that point. If you were to choose a generation that was less likely to be able to achieve the freedom of this country, you would probably pick that generation. And also what they took on was absolutely phenomenal. It was the biggest empire that the world had ever seen. A Union Jack, or some form of that flag, had flown over Trim and every other town in this country for maybe 400, 500, 600 years. And to that generation, it must have seemed absolutely immovable. But that generation didn't spend any time on their knees, for they knew that they had to stand up. They had to stand up for economic reasons. They knew that self-determination was 100% key. In actual fact, the famine has shown in flashing neon lights that if you didn't determine your own future, if you left it to somebody else to determine your future, you can guarantee they would not do it for your best interests. And that's what happened in the famine. London determined our interests here and not for the good of the Irish people. So the first thing I like to do in these occasions is to think about what actually happened. And I think that Jack Lynch has read out the actions of those individuals. Normal, average human beings. And when he read out the names, these are names that still echo in Trim and in Believer and in Longwood today. We recognise those names and those families. Indeed, my own families, the McAvoys, they were located on High Street at the time. They had a hotel on High Street, just exactly at this moment in time. So it's important to remember those people. The second reason why we commemorate is to see why they did what they did and try to emulate their actions and achieve the objectives that they sought. And they sought to achieve self-determination first and foremost. And if we want to know what they believed, it was very simple. They left a document for us, and that document is a wonderful document. The Proclamation of the Irish Republic in 1916, and it holds a wonderful set of objectives whereby orange and green could live in harmony together, in freedom together, in peace together, and could actually achieve a new country. And that's what they set out. And one of the most important elements of that particular proclamation was the objective to cherish all the children of the nation equally. And that has a number of different contexts. It has the context of orange and green, in which a major divide happened. And as you know, our tricolour stands for peace between orange and green. But it also stands for making sure that everybody has a decent opportunity to live and exist in our country. That everybody has a standard of living that allows them to feed their family, to roof their family, to achieve education for their family, and to achieve healthcare for their family. That's what that equality was about. And that's one of the reasons why the revolutionaries 100 years ago did what they did as well. So this is their objective, and I believe that if we were to commemorate those individuals properly, yes, it's a wonderful thing to do, to come out here today and pay homage to those individuals. But if I was lying in a grave, in a cold graveyard somewhere, and I was asked the question, would you rather that men and women stood outside of the battle 100 years ago, or would you rather that men and women focused on your objectives and did their utmost to achieve their objectives? Which would you choose? And the logic is obvious. The only way you can commemorate the men and women that battled here 100 years ago is to actually try and achieve the objectives that they set out. That is the real commemoration. And it always interests me of how this state looks at that time. I've been battling myself with regards the Moore Street area in Dublin. The Moore Street, as you know, is the birthplace of the Republic. It's where the men and women left GPO in the final few days to try and escape the GPO. And they went up the streets into Moore Street. They drilled their way through houses, and when they couldn't get through houses, they ran on the streets to escape. And they were mown down by British Army machine guns at the time. Today, 104 years after that battle, does Moore Street stand as a symbol of that revolution and that republic? Does it stand as an educational opportunity where people learn about the men and women and their values? Or is it actually a derelict site at the moment, where people defecate, urinate, take drugs and take alcohol? Shockingly, it's the latter. Shockingly, we have a situation where the government has not upheld its side of the bargain. Think about this. All of the ministers that exist in our government today owe their ministerial positions to the men and women who fought in 1916. They would not have that executive power, that executive office, only for the men and women who came out 100 years ago here. And yet, they will not show them any respect with regards to the way they treat Moore Street and the way they treat the House of the O'Reilly in Herbert Park. The legacy of those men and women are very far down the pecking order with regards to priorities of this government. Now, the issue of self-determination is as important today as it was 100 years ago, in my view. Right now, we're in the middle of the Brexit storm. Think about this. The people of the North, determined to support the Good Friday Agreement, they determined with their vote to remain inside the EU. The Tory party in London and their attitude of self-determination took those two views, they rolled them into a paper ball and threw it into the bin. And we have a situation today where Tories, who don't get one vote on the island of Ireland, who care nothing about our country and know even less, are determining our ability to trade, our ability to do business, our ability to function as a country, and I think that's wrong. And this week, I put it to Fine Gael, to Simon Coveney, that now is the time. I understand why I think Simon Coveney is a decent man. I'll tell you that. I think his instincts are towards unity. His instincts are towards independence. But unfortunately, Simon Coveney is taking up a massive level of cautiousness. I think cautiousness in this area is logical. But the truth of the matter is, the point where the chaos created in London, where the self-determination of the Irish people is ignored so much, that cautiousness starts to change and starts to realise that unity is an opportunity to make sure that we have proper self-determination and that our self-interests are actually governed. Now is the time, and Aontú is calling it, for an all-Ireland national forum to be created, to bring about civic views and political views across the 32 counties into a room, and let's talk about how we can ameliorate the worst excesses of Brexit, and let's talk about how we can start to build towards a unity for everybody. Now, Aontú is a pluralist Republican party. We believe in the Irish Republic of Wolf Tone, a country where Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter and atheists can all be who they are to the full extent, without fear or favour from the state. That we don't have to hide anybody in the shadows, that nobody has to go into a closet, that the richness of everybody's culture and attitudes can actually add more to the state. And that's the type of country that we need to found over the next while. I want to just tell you about two stories about cherishing all the children equally that are very important, that we're working on at the moment. The first is about a woman, a young mother in Dublin, who had a scan in a Dublin hospital. And on the way out of the door of that scan, she was told her child was fine. She was asked, did she want to have a NIPT test, a non-invasive pregnancy test by that hospital. She had the test, and the doctor came to her, and the doctor told her that her child had a fetal fatal abnormality, or that child had a life-limiting condition. And that mother was broken-hearted when she heard that news. Now, she intended to proceed with the pregnancy, but the doctors told her that it was illogical to do so, and that she needed to terminate or abort that child. She went back and forth to the doctor over periods of time, and the doctor said to her, are you going to listen to the medics on Google, or are you going to listen to me? Unfortunately, that woman went ahead and had that termination, had that abortion. The final element of that test came through immediately after that operation took place, which showed that child was fully healthy.
God.
We also know that the two obstetricians, who, according to the law of the land, were meant to examine her, didn't examine her. We also know that the hospital did not report it to the government at all until there was a solicitor's letter sent by the family to the hospital. We know that the law was broken left, right and centre. That mother and father today are broken-hearted, but they're not going to lie down. They're not going to accept a situation where the government won't investigate this. They're fighting for a clear, honest, open investigation. So far, the two major government parties have ignored this. And no matter what your attitude is towards that very important issue, this is a clear wrong. And I'm calling again for the government to investigate what happened to that family. It's absolutely shocking. The second situation about cherishing all the children equally in the nation I want to mention is a woman by the name of Mary Bartley Meath. Mary Bartley Meath comes from this county. She had a husband and a son in a nursing home in the middle of the COVID crisis. She went to visit her husband. Her husband's face was black with congealed blood. His nails were long, and unknown to himself, he had started to pick at the tumour that existed in his face. Now, I don't like going into the details of this at all, but I tell you, Mary watched a video of her husband's condition recently. She watched it, because she wanted to know exactly what the information was about her husband so she could fight for her husband. She has asked HICWA, she has asked the Department of Health, she has asked the Minister for Health, she has asked the HSE, and Emer Tobin sent a letter to the Ombudsman looking for an investigation. All of the state organisations have refused to investigate what happened to her husband and her son who are in that nursing home. Now I ask you, does that fulfil the objective of cherish all the children of the nation equally? It absolutely doesn't.
No.
And it's important that we as a people make sure that nobody falls through the cracks, that we make sure that everybody achieves justice. I want to talk just about the COVID crisis at the moment. There's a lot of controversy happening with regard to COVID. My view is that we have to be careful. My view is we don't know what's going to happen. My view is where we can, we should protect each other with social distancing, wearing masks in shops and on public transport. But I will say this about the government, and I've asked the government this. The government have done no research into the closure of capacity into the health service in this country. They've closed between 50% and 20% of the capacity in the health service. So if you have a mental health issue, you cannot get a face-to-face, in-person meeting with a counsellor or a psychiatrist. You can get your hair cut. I could go to a beauty salon, and some of you might think I should go to a beauty salon. But the truth of the matter is, it's a shocking situation that we have people with serious mental health issues across the country who are not getting the care that they need. Cervical check, bowel check, breast check, all of these were cancelled by the government. Thankfully, the cervical check and bowel check are up and running, but the capacity is still not there to deal with the backlog. 200,000 women are waiting for cancer screening at the moment in this state, and breast check is still not back up and running, and that's absolutely wrong. I spoke to a doctor recently who told me that thankfully none of his patients died because of COVID. He told me three of his patients have had delayed diagnosis and delayed treatment when it comes to cancer. And he's told me that he thinks that those 3 patients are going to die. And that's replicated right across the country, and it's wrong. In my view, the government needs to make sure that the health service stays open. It needs to investigate exactly the cost of these restrictions and to make sure that they're actually working. And we need to make sure that we come out the other side, that there's an exit strategy in this. I thoroughly believe that. Today, we're here at an Aontú, a commemoration for this incredible action that happened 100 years ago. And I want to say to people here that the objectives of those men and women are equally as important today as it was 100 years ago. There are many parties who will feel that they hold the same flame as those men and women. But I believe that our new movement is the most important political movement in this country. I believe that our objectives are the most important objectives in this country. To achieve them, we need to make sure that we show the same level of commitment and energy as those men and women did back then. We need to make sure that we show the same level of strategy, focus and cohesion and work. And I'm delighted to say that under Kieran's leadership in here in Trim, that we have a wonderful Trim coming here, and it's growing all the time. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you have done over the last 18 months in building our new movement. We've achieved more than 50,000 votes nationally already. We have 6 elected reps. We have over 1,000 members. We have 60 functioning coming. And over the next 4 or 5 years, the political establishment better watch out, because we're going to take that energy and grow further. Guramila Mahoguf Galer.
Thank you. Thank you indeed, Peter, and thanks all to Jack, and thanks to everybody who came out with kind words. It's very difficult to communicate here with all the traffic, but we conclude with our own Navid.
We are Karen. We are soon. Shantir our sheep share fossa. We offer, we tira the vitro. Anokta hay in savern if will the color quill. Rush no sail. We know how to learn. Shanif Koni Aranavi. You have a lovely voice for singing that.
Distant photograph here, just if it's possible. So if people keep at least arm length away from each other, we just get a little photograph with the flags that might be visible in 100 years' time. Okay?